Good evening, and welcome to this episode of Carpe Diem. In this episode, we are going to discuss the federal budget. And I call it the federal budget because the administration is the person, the people who put this budget out. But truly, it is our budget. We are the citizens of this country, and we are the taxpayers. So I think it's very important to go through the budget. And if you look at everything, I won't say everything, but in most circumstances, so you could look at the Epstein situation, whatnot. Everyone says, follow the money. Being a banker and a CPA, I firmly believe in that. So understand that Congress has passed the big, beautiful bill. I hate to call it that, but that's what it is. But that doesn't mean we have a budget approved. So understand that the federal government is a fiscal year end, 9/30, September 30th. So we're getting very close to year end 2025. And what I'm going to show you is what the administration has budgeted for 26. So on your screen should be a handwritten, now I handwrite it because I don't have any staff, but it's also good for me because it helps me learn it and understand it better. And that works for me. So if you look at this, the federal government breaks down their budget between receipts and outlays. Okay, just like your own budget at home. And then you have, now understand, these are budgeted numbers, not actual. So you have the 25 budget. I have yet to see where 25 actually came out. And understand, as a CEO of a bank, I've been doing budgets for decades, and they can be problematic, depending. And then you have September of 26, and this is the budget that's proposed. I think it was done in May, so here we are in September. It may change. And don't forget, Congress has to pass this budget by the end of September, or we're going to have a shutdown. So that's a separation between approving the budget and approving the big, beautiful bill. All right, let's go through these numbers. Again, receipts, outlays, and the outlays are defined by mandatory programs and discretionary programs. So let's go through the receipts. Individual taxes last year, and you got to get your numbers right, and I have a hard time with this. These are billions of dollars. So individual taxes last year, $2,679,000,000,000. They are projecting an increase to $2,976,000,000,000. I don't buy that, and here's why I say that. Several headwinds are coming in from this. State and local tax deductions. That was initially a $10,000 cap. That's been raised to $40,000, which many Republicans and others in the blue states were hoping for. No taxes on tips. No taxes on Social Security. Well, those are headwinds that are going to reduce our taxable income. But in my mind, the bigger issue is, and you've seen just recently, the difficulties in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, which is really the federal agency that monitors payroll growth, which if you're going to get more income from individual taxes, you need payroll growth for that. That's what's going to do that. Well, I think just today or yesterday, the BLS is revising payroll down, and it's not doing well. Job growth is not strong, and job growth is receding, if anything. So why is that? You could look at a variety of reasons, but I look at it this way. And you can look at all the details in the BLS statistics and whatnot, but in my mind, I look at it from 2 or 3 very high-level areas. One, trade and tariffs. So from my interactions with the people I know, most companies have frozen hiring because they don't know what to do. The Trump administration is changing tariffs almost every day. Nobody knows what's going to happen. So what happens to you as a business owner? You freeze. You just say, well, I'm not going to do much of anything because I don't know what the landscape is going to hold. Immigration. So we're getting rid of all sorts of people who served a very strong, uh, what would you call it, value to our economy, which is they worked agriculture, and they worked in manufacturing. So I saw in the news, I think today, saying, I was looking at the raid on the South Korean Hyundai plant in Georgia. Well, the administration is saying, well, these individuals are taking jobs away from Americans who want those jobs. Number one, I don't think they want those jobs. I really don't. Number two, if you're trying to do trade with South Korea, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go to a South Korean plant and arrest a bunch of people. So there are all sorts of conflicting factors. I'm still on the top line, individual taxes. And I think the biggest thing to me is businesses have lost confidence. They don't know where the country's going. And are we going to wake up every day to Donald Trump's whims as to what he wants to do with tariffs and other economic issues? It just is not going to fly very well. So let's go down to the next line, corporate taxes. I've heard a lot of discussion about, well, let's just raise corporate tax rates. Well, look at that ratio. Corporate taxes are about a quarter of individual taxes. The money is not in corporate taxes. It's in individual taxes. I'll go through this some more and then do a recap of my opinions of what all this means. But again, I have tried to put this in very simple terms. This has been a very complicated budget. I spent a lot of hours going through it. There's really not a lot of information here. So I believe these numbers are essentially correct, not to the dollar, but really pretty good. So what we do as government accounting is we gross up some of these costs. So you can see payroll taxes. Let's talk about Social Security, which is FICA. Everyone's had FICA taken out of their paycheck. The budget for next year is that we will deduct $1,342 billion out of Social Security. Go down to outlays, which is what we're going to pay out, which is $1,637,000,000. That's a $295 billion shortfall. That's enormous. Go down to the next one, Medicare. So that's all part of what's deducted from your paycheck. The administration is proposing $519 billion reduced, but Medicare is going to cost $997 billion. That's a $478 billion shortfall. So just look at those two programs. And I'm not assuming that we should get rid of it, but I think something needs to be done. So if you add those two shortfalls, that's $773 billion shortfall projected for 26. Go down to the very bottom. Our deficit is $1.5 trillion. So that's really about half of our deficit is in those two programs. Then you've got, okay, so that's income, 5873, receipts, up by $388 billion, but mostly from the expectation that we're going to get more taxable income. I don't buy it. Sorry, I just don't. So let's go down to outlays. Medicaid. There's been so much discussion about Medicaid, and it's important. But understand, Medicaid is not a deduction from your paycheck. It's supported, at least it was supported by the federal government. The cost of that is projected to be $625 billion. Understand in the big, beautiful bill, there was all sorts of discussion about restricting Medicaid. That's not in this budget. Medicaid is not supposed to go into effect, I believe, until 27, the changes in the big, beautiful bill. So that is yet to be determined what will happen with that. But if you were to look at that and look at the deficits from Social Security, Medicare, add Medicaid to that, that's almost all our federal deficit. I'm not saying we should touch that, but I'm just saying those are huge numbers. Then we get to interest on debt, and I have another graph for that. Honestly, that is the area that worries me the most, and I will go through that graph in a moment. A few other mandatory programs, but again, I've tried to simplify this and put it into line items that hopefully you can understand, that everyone can understand, because these are items that have been talked about if you are watching. So then we get into discretionary programs. Understandably, defense is discretionary. We can choose how much we're going to spend. So we have increased the budget for defense by $119 billion. In my mind, we should do that because we have pissed off everybody so much. We better have a good defense. Homeland Security, including FEMA and ICE, $175 billion for that budget. So that's an increase of $110 billion. So let me go into this, what they call non-defense discretionary spending. And I have a couple of pieces of literature out here. One is from Russell Vought, who is in charge of the Office of Management and Budget. And the comments these are the comments that were attached to this budget. And then another one, which is President Trump's, which I think was written by Vought, but his comments about it. So I will focus on this one area, which I find very misleading and untruthful. If you look at the non-defense discretionary funding, which would be Homeland Security on this worksheet, all the way down. So look at, and I'm going to go through some of these changes, but look at Homeland Security. So these are non-defense discretionary funding. $110 billion on Homeland Security, emergency funding. So this is really interesting. I don't really know what to do with this, but when I was looking at it, apparently Congress approved discretionary funding for a multitude of agencies, EPA, FEMA, what have you. So if there's an emergency, you can call it a fund, but the idea, as I understand it, would be you would not have to go, if there's a hurricane and you need to go in there and help, you don't have time to go to Congress and get more appropriation bills. So you have this emergency funding. Well, guess what the Trump administration did? They said, well, we don't need it. No emergency funding. That's $118 billion. That's most of the cuts in the whole discretionary budget. Now, if FEMA or EPA or some other CDC or some other disaster happened and they did not have the funding for it, I'm not sure where the administration would get it. I would assume they'd steal it from some other bucket, but they feel they don't need emergency funding. And then I will just trust briefly on, so if you look down here, HUD, I tried to pick the basic agencies that we have been hearing about throughout everything. HUD, House of Urban Development, HHS, NIH, CDC, US Aid, and Education. And I'll go through more of this in a bit. But if you add up Homeland Security change of 110+ billion, plus these reductions, emergency funding, Well, that's not really a reduction in cost. They just reallocated or got rid of it. HUD is down 33 billion. HHS is down 33 billion. US aid is down 77 billion. Education is down 12 billion. You add all that up, that adds to a reduction of 163 billion for this year. So let me read to you what these geniuses are saying. So this is from Russell Vought, which was a letter to the Honorable Susan Collins, who is chair of the Appropriations Committee. Cutting spending from the discretionary budget, what we were just talking about, leads to significant savings. The president is proposing base non-defense discretionary budget authority 163 billion below current year spending. So you can see that 163 billion right there. 110 up for Homeland Security, but the biggest takeaway is this emergency funding item. Oh, so here's the thing that bothers me most. Over 10 years, this restraint would generate trillions in savings necessary for balancing the budget. Okay, so look at these numbers in the discretionary, non-defense discretionary funding. You could get rid of all of that, and we're not going to balance the budget. There's not enough money there. Now, understand, this is the area where Doge, Elon Musk, really focused on. And guess what? And this is why you have to follow the money. When people get on TV and talk about things, you have to really investigate. So look at this. Elon Musk said he's going to save $2 trillion through waste, abuse, and fraud. Okay, I'm so sick of those lines. Look at this budget. There's not $2 trillion to save. It's just not there unless you just get rid of every agency and everything we do. It's not there. So Doge started with $2 trillion in expense reductions. Then they reduced it to $1 trillion. And then this 163 billion that's both in Russell Vaught's letter and Trump's letter is what they're saying they've saved. But guess what? They spent it all on defense. So go down to total discretionary costs. We were at $1,929,000,000. We're at $1,927,000,000. So there is no savings. The idea that over 10 years we're going to generate trillions of savings is just fallacy. There's no savings here. What we've done is rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic, unfortunately. Now, again, I'm not against increasing the defense budget. I think we should have the best military there, and particularly since no one's too happy with us. So if you look at this budget, we are increasing our deficit by $1.5 trillion. And if you look at what we have here, really, discretionary programs, we can't do much with that. Now, should we be increasing Homeland Security by 110 billion? Well, you know, that's paying for Alligator Alcatraz and all. Did I hear this right, that we are paying a $50,000 bonus for ICE agents to come in? I've never heard of such a thing. I was CEO of a bank. I never paid people $50,000 for what I would call entry level, but not a senior level. That's just preposterous in my mind. So honestly, there's only a couple things you can do with this budget, and you got to go up top. I am of the opinion that we're going to have to do something with Social Security and Medicare. We can't have these deficits. And there is many things that can be done to find a way to reduce not the current costs, but future costs. What could you do? You could say, okay, everyone who's got it keeps it. Everyone who's ready to retire in the next 5 years, you get it. But the younger employees don't get the same program. Every private business has done this. Private business used to have defined benefit programs that said, well, if you retire, you're going to get X amount of dollars. No one does that anymore. It's too expensive. So I think there's a way to deal with those shortfalls by protecting the people that have it, but changing the program going forward. I don't see how we balance the budget if we don't do that. And, I don't want my Social Security to be cut, but just looking at it from a dollars and cents point of view, it is going to be the right thing to do. Now, Trump, I truly believe, is trying to balance this budget. He's trying whatever he can do. I really believe he wants to balance the budget, but balancing it on non-defense discretionary programs isn't going to do it. So let's look at the other income things he is trying to accomplish. Tariffs. Okay, what is that? 200 billion? Maybe? I don't know. But the Supreme Court is, I think just today, agreed to take on the case. And we'll see. So the Supreme Court is only supposed to look at the legality of what he's doing, not whether it's a good thing for the country or bad. I believe there's no way that Trump is legally using that. It's the authority of Congress, but he can't get Congress to have a majority, so he's doing it by himself. So this is going to be a very interesting case, the Supreme Court. So we got tariffs, and I've heard numbers of maybe 200 billion, maybe less. And if the Supreme Court rules against the administration, they're going to have to rebate that. I don't know. But there's no question tariffs have made businesses stymied because they don't know what to expect. And when you don't know what to expect, you pull in your horns and you say, we're just going to write it out for a year. Hence, no new hiring, no new things, because everyone's nervous about that. So potentially, maybe the Supreme Court says, well, Congress has to approve it, and Trump's got to get an approval from Congress. What I don't like about what he's doing with tariffs is that it's so, it depends on when he wakes up each day as to what he's going to do and who has been nice to him and who is doing the things he wants. So it's very clear he's using tariffs to get a behavior that he wants, but he's using tariffs to get it, which I think that's inappropriate. So we have investments. So we have the mineral deal in Ukraine. Will we ever get any money off that? Who knows? We have potentially investment in Intel, which that's a totally different subject, and I think it's a terrible mistake for our federal government to get into private business, but nevertheless, maybe there's money from that. How about all the penalties? Penalties for the universities and penalties for legal firms. So that's some money. But we are almost, according to this, about $3 trillion in taxable revenues. So in my mind, there's only a couple of things you can do here. Raise taxes. You have to raise taxes. And how you do that and split it up between the wealthy and others. But if you study this, there is no money in discretionary programs. They're very needed, but that's not going to balance the budget. Social Security and Medicare, we got to do something with that, and we got to raise taxes. I just don't see any other way around that. All right, let's go on to interest on debt. You can tell I did not do this because it's not written in handwriting. So I had a friend of mine do this. So there's a couple of things I need to explain about this. This is a yield graph of our U.S. Treasury securities. And what I've done is taken our marketable fixed rate Treasury securities and put them into buckets. So you can see each maturity bucket, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, out to 30 years. And then what I did is I said, well, what's the current rates on this portfolio? And that's the black line. Now understand the way I did this, and it doesn't mean that these are all going to mature in the next year or two. These are just the maturity buckets that they're in. So you really have to look at this as I look at it as a repricing model. What if we had to reprice our total portfolio today? That's what this says. Now there's one major assumption in there, and I did this as a banker all the time. You have to assume that if someone's in a 3-month treasury and it renews, they're going to renew it 3 months, or they're going to renew it a year, or they're going to renew it 5 years. That's not true. And I'm sure there's probably all sorts of people who could do AI models that say that's not the behavior. But in simplicity, this is just taking our Treasury securities and saying, here's their buckets, here's the rate they're at, and if we had to reprice it, here's the rate it's going to be at. So if you go down to the bottom in the table, we have about 25.9 trillion in outstanding fixed rate Treasury securities. We also have another 2.6 trillion in floating. So I'm not really looking at that because I'm looking at the repricing risk. And then we have 7.6 billion in non-marketable, which is mostly savings bonds. So you buy savings bond, non-marketable, which gets us to 36 trillion in Treasury securities. It's enormous. We are making a serious mistake by not paying this debt down. So you can see in the budget I just showed you, we're going to increase our deficit by 1.5. If we don't get the increase in taxes, it's going to be $2 trillion. And it's going to be that for future years. It's a serious mistake for our government. And again, in looking at these finances, we're not saving anything. Yes, we tried to save in discretionary programs, but we spent it somewhere else. So there is absolutely zero savings in this budget. And I'm sure that's why Chip Roy from Texas had such a problem. All right, let's go back to this Treasury matrix. So look at the differential between the current rates. So on the very left is a red square. That's the Fed funds rate. So if there's any one goal I can try and communicate to viewers is that the Fed does not control long-term rates. The markets do. The Fed only controls the short-term Fed funds rate. And what they try to do is influence the markets as to how they want to go. All right, so what I look at is mostly go to the 120 month. That's the 10-year Treasury. This is what mortgages are priced off of. That's how I always priced our mortgage originations. This is really, the 10-year Treasury is, what would you call it? The gold standard is how things are priced. So look at this. The current rate on 10-year Treasuries is about 2.75. You have to go over.
Here's what I found.
You have to go to the right. Sorry, I don't know what that is. If you look at the red line, which is what would that cost if we had to reprice that entire bucket, it's 4.25. That's 150 basis point difference. My conclusion is there's nothing the Treasury can do to reduce that gap. It just is not going to happen. So Trump can take over the Fed. He can put his own people in there. So go down again to that left square. Trump is talking, wanting to reduce that by 300 basis points, which would put it down. You know, you can look at it, and you'd have a much more steeper yield curve. But guess what? I don't think the markets are going to buy it. And I think there's a significant risk that rates will go up. And let me talk about just interest rates for a second. I've been doing this for a long time. When I took my bank public, I was interviewed by all sorts of young, very smart analysts. Well, here was my problem. They weren't born during the Volcker years when we had huge rates. Those weren't good rates. I remember my first mortgage was 13.75. Now, of course, housing was much cheaper then, but nevertheless, enormous rates. Our rates are not that high. Historically, what's happened in my mind is we've lived for 10, 15, I don't know how many years, in an unusually low interest rate environment. And part of that was caused by COVID, other reasons. But that low interest rate environment really, in my mind, is not healthy. And I don't believe our rates are that high, but nevertheless. So look at that 10-year. If Trump stacks the Treasury and drops that square on the left way down there, you'll have a steeper yield curve. I don't think it's going to affect that 10-year rate. So what is the long-term Treasury market governed by? Inflation expectations. So obviously tariffs are weighing on this majorly because clearly tariff inflation really hasn't happened much yet. And it's interesting how we as a country or human beings, we can be so short-sighted. So many of these things take quite a while to run through. It takes time, and we want immediate answers. So Trump can do that. But go down to the bottom here, and of the 25.9 trillion we have, I had this portfolio repriced at current rates, and that said that the interest cost would be $1,083,000,000,000. Go back to my budget. I have no idea how the government came up with this number, but they're saying $1,013,000,000,000. Not that far away. I'm not quite sure how they got that $1 trillion number. This chart is what worries me the most. It has the potential to explode and cause major damage to us. Also understand that 30% of these treasuries are owned by foreign countries. Japan has the most, $1 trillion. I thought it would be China, but Japan has more. China's pretty close to another trillion, but there's 10.8 trillion from other countries investing in our treasury securities. And go back and look at this. We need another 1.5 trillion in debt. So we're going to be relying on other countries to invest in our debt. Okay, inflation, tariffs affect that. Fed independence. If the market believes that the Fed is now just a politicized agency and going to do what politics says, flat out, it's going to raise rates. Just that is going to raise rates. Political uncertainty, not knowing what's happening in our government, that's going to raise rates. Trust is a huge piece of that as to the confidence level. And then, of course, you have ratings. Moody's downgraded our rating. Standard & Poor's kept it. But if we go on with this, the rating is going to depreciate, which is going to cost us more money. So as a banker, we are the wealthiest and strongest country in the world, and we are making a serious mistake. We should be a lender, not a borrower. We're a borrower, and we've got to get this budget under control. So my message is we're going to have to deal with Social Security and Medicare some way to make it equitable and find a way to do that. And we're going to have to raise taxes. There's just no two ways around it. The money, the numbers just don't work if you don't do that. Okay, that's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time on Carpe Diem. Remember, seize the day and vote with this knowledge, and hold your Congress people accountable to these items because they're extremely important. Thank you, and I hope you see us next time.